Rolo. I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic. Let me tell you what I was. I was a liar, cheat, and a thief. I thought of myself as less than a cockroach, so you know your life didn't mean anything. Drugs and alcohol got me that way. I remember a time in a grocery store that I used to buy my lunch from when I was a little innocent kid. After prolonged use of alcohol and drugs, it turned me into somebody I didn't know. I came back a number of years later, and I remember it was a mom and pop store, and I went in the store with a 25 automatic and put the lady behind the cash register on the floor with a gun at her head, knowing that her husband may come out of the store at any time, and I was willing to shoot him because I had to do what I had to do for drugs and alcohol. You may not understand that now. You may think I'm a wretch. Drugs and alcohol does that to people. You have to live the experience to realize it. At one time in my life, alcohol was social. I never disassociated my life with consumption of alcohol and drugs. It became my friend at an early age. You know, I remember the first time I ever drank to excess and got drunk. My two brothers, one who is dead now as a result of drugs and alcohol, died violently, picked me up out of a gutter, half in the gutter and half in the street in my own vomit. See, what happened was, a few hours earlier, I drank my first, what they call a short dog, a small bottle of wine. I waited 3 minutes, didn't feel anything, so I drank another one. But I guess the essence of all that is, the next day when I woke up, I didn't focus on being ill physically and what I had done. I focused on the alcohol allowing me to be free, I thought. As a result of that, the balance of the bad as opposed to the balance of the good made no difference to me. It manifested. Prior to that, after that, I ran through a string of robberies, burglaries, dealing drugs. It seemed to be that I thought I wasn't valid as a human being. For some strange reason, you know, I guess some people dive into academics and a healthy way to live. I dove into drugs and alcohol and the lifestyle it entails. It's like someone inside watching somebody like a whirlwind of rage and anger through the lives of others. You have no control. It was like alcohol and drugs were a grim pimp and a reaper of my soul. You know, I used to lay awake at night, coming out of a drunk or going into one, or being sick from alcohol and drugs and shaking and withdrawing and every muscle in my body aching and craving for sweet peace through the drugs. Yet every time going through a nightmare when I didn't have them. It drove me into a loss of a family and a gorgeous, beautiful 15-year-old son who at the time, I remember because of drugs and alcohol, and I had a fear that I couldn't identify, I remember he'd cry and I'd be frustrated and I'd take his bottle and throw it against the wall under the influence of alcohol and drugs, not knowing what became of the guy because I didn't come from a garbage can. I came from a good family in San Francisco. I was introduced to some people through my father's nightclub that were very well-to-do, and I was brought up right. But I remember in my family, you know, earmarks of my drug use and alcoholism, looking back in retrospect, that I used to see the men around me and the men in my family never share any emotions. And I had a lot going on, so I drowned them with alcohol and drugs. I thought I was a freak or some strange specimen other than a human being. But when I took alcohol and drugs, I was willing to pay a price. And I paid a lot of prices. My life became chaotic. I destroyed and created harm to everybody who ever came in contact that loved me. To see there was a scared little kid with an old face who looked around the world and couldn't cope. I know today that's part of my alcoholism, not the chemical, but my thinking. It's something that the medics call an X factor that non-alcoholics and non-addicts don't have. They haven't identified what caused it, but they know it's there. A lot of good that does. You know, it was like the psychiatrist when I was certified criminally and mentally insane in 2 states. They said, according to the psychiatric manual, section 14, line 12, you have this, you have this. And I used to say, thank God, I'm not crazy, I'm not an animal.
For most people, alcohol is simply a sedative drug. When these people drink 1 or 2 drinks, the alcohol brings them down into a state of prolonged relaxation. Gradually, as the effect wears off, their bodies return to a stage of normal balance. They've enjoyed the effect, satisfied, and experience no physical desire for more. In fact, if they drink too much, their body has an automatic shut-off mechanism that tells them they've had too much, and the next time warns them about their drinking. The sad part about it is at least 10% of the population have what we call sedative irritant reaction. Actually, that's just a fancy medical term for someone becoming an alcoholic. When they drink, they get a short period of relaxation, euphoria, followed by a swing back up into tension. The next dose of the drug brings the person down into relaxation once more, just temporarily, only to be followed by a rebound back into tension. As this person continues to drink alcohol, he finds that his drinking is increasing and that he's drinking faster than others. He tends to gulp his drinks. And it is this type of addictive reaction which forms the basis for a person becoming hooked on alcohol or drugs. The sincere reasoning of the mind attempts to limit consumption, and they're overridden by the strong body reaction demanding more and more alcohol. Another sad thing, sometimes people associate the alcohol addict with just the Skid Row scenario. Yes, they estimate 3% end up on Skid Row. That's something to think about, too. This is one man's scenario of his spot on Skid Row.
I don't know if you know anything about a street called 5th and Main. I didn't know about it at one time in my life. I used to see the people that lived on it. I used to throw quarters in the gutter, watch them scuffle for it, and laugh with my friends. It's farthest thing from my mind. One day in 1976, at 26 years old, I was on the same street, sucking on a wine bottle in a doorway, wondering whatever in the hell happened to me. Who knows? May not happen to you. You're like me, it'll happen to the guy next to you. Couldn't happen to you. You're intelligent. You got a market on life. Everything's still okay, you think. I felt that way once. Then I found myself walking around. Alcohol and drugs did lead me to 5th Street. If you've never lived there, you couldn't experience. You know, words don't seem to sum up that life. It's a jungle. Now let me tell you, my friend, what it's like on 5th Street in L.A. Everybody's armed with something. If you're out in the late night hours, you're either a mugger or a muggee. You guard your territory, maybe a doorway, maybe some cardboard boxes or one of them refuse boxes. They call them Dipsy dumpsters. A guy will take your life for that space. It ain't very fun. But you learn to do what you have to do while someone inside is scared to death. You know, it's very hard for me to try to translate to you what it's like. But think of animals. Scared, frightened animals. Think of rattlesnakes trapped in a corner afraid you'll step on them and they strike. My friend, that's what it's like. Can you make it through the night? Do you sit at the all-night mission in the wooden hard chairs where you have to sit up, you can't lay down? Or do you go to the all-night theater and tie your shoes around the neck so no one will steal them? Or if you're lucky, you don't wake up with your throat cut. That's what it's like down there. You learn to adjust. Running scared all the time. If the police don't get you, someone on the streets will. So you learn to hook up with people you never ever thought you would. Because you're scared and you're miserable and you need protection. The Nickel's 5th Street, Los Angeles. It may look like your city street. It's an asphalt jungle. It's real. Lives are cheap. You know, maybe your greatest thing, or maybe you're the guy that was somebody one day before he got into drugs and alcohol, the same guy, his biggest deal is pray that you can con somebody into making the store run for the alcohol and keep going. Because Lord knows you need as much as you can get. That's what it's all about. Prostitute your soul. You know? Listen to the speech because you need a quarter for a drink because you're shaking in your own skin. It's humiliating, alcoholism. You probably got some of your own humiliation. You know, you lay in the streets and you might die if it's wintertime. You're fortunate in the summer, but in the winter, you try to cover up, sometimes with newspaper, in a corner. Hopefully you got somebody you drink with. One of you will stay awake while the other one sleeps to keep you alive. Because anything unconscious is prey down there. You know, I remember when they had the Skid Row slasher, I lost one of my friends. He was the last victim. He wasn't always what you consider the 3% of alcoholics at Skid Row Wino. He was a linguistics professor at Boston University at one time. One of the smartest dressed guys I ever knew. One of the most articulate men that I've been exposed to. He died because he passed out in a doorway. And he was defenseless because he was in an alcoholic, slumber ain't even the right word, an alcoholic coma. I've been there. Being so intoxicated, your mind's awake, but your body's paralyzed. I had to read it in the paper. Somebody crept up on him and slit his throat. You know, all them people down there have families. They have loved ones. They're not just a statistic. They're not some wretch. They've all accomplished something in life. But alcoholism sucked it away. His nightmare's over. Because you see, when I was practicing my illness, drinking and using, I prayed every day I wouldn't wake up. Dying wasn't a fear. Drinking and not taking away the feelings was. And I had to live one more day.
This is Gary Thiemann in Hollywood, and thanks for joining me. We're right smack dab in the middle of a brand new story from a brand new person about to recover from the nickel 5th Street in downtown LA, Skid Row. You're listening to a man who's been there, and he's sharing his hope and his love with you. And if this program reaches just one person, then it's all been worth it. A person in denial who will be given the chance to become one of those chosen people who go on to become sober individuals who beat alcohol and drugs. Sure, it's a recovering process for the rest of your life, but sobriety is worth it. A lot of people that hear this story will probably think, well, it is just 3%. But that 3%, and this is a living example, doesn't have to be. We're talking about alcoholism, where one's life is unmanageable beyond the imaginable. The person himself is usually amazed that he is suddenly fending for his life on the streets of many of our major cities across the nation. Driving down the street, you can see for yourself the problems that we're faced with as a nation. Maybe you can help. After all, it is a people problem. This is his story. How Rolo got off of Skid Row, the Nickel, in downtown L.A.
One day I was drinking with a guy that I on occasion drank with or passed across on Skid Row, L.A. And Richard mentioned to me, he said, you know, there's a place we can go to get some food in our stomachs and maybe some rest where we can move on. And, you know, I asked him, I said, well, you know, everything in life's got a hook. I said, there's got to be something we got to tell them. There's something they might want to hear. And he said, yeah, you just tell me you're an alcoholic. And I says, what? I'm an alcoholic. And then I looked around where I was. Everybody was an alcoholic where I was. That's all my life had become. You know, trying to seek alcohol, coming off alcohol, shivering in the middle of the night with no place to stay, because when it was between a room or another bottle, the bottle always won. So I went there and I played the game, told him, yeah, I'm an alcoholic, walked through the door and said, boy, I sure got one over on them again. I beat the system one more time. Because you see, there was never nothing wrong with me. It was always the world. And I went in there, and they told me some things that got me hostile. They told me that my problem wasn't the world, it was alcohol. And they told me things like, you know, if I asked you 3 questions that you needed to answer honestly and pay attention to, I'd give you a crisp $100 bill at the end of the conversation. And they says, yeah. And I says, yeah, I'd answer them right. And I'd get the $100 bill. And they said, isn't your life worth more than that? And I had to think. The place I'm speaking about is the Harbor Light. Salvation Army Harbor Light Center for Alcoholic Men. 7 floors. An old building like they built. All concrete, fireproof. Long halls and very few windows. But the appearance wasn't that important. You know, there were people there that I met. And from appearances, they just looked like guys that met the end of the road also. But we talked late at night in the rooms. Some of these guys at one time had families. They had their own businesses. I remember one guy I met was a nuclear physicist. And another guy that was a linguistics professor at Boston University at one time. I guess at that time when he was drinking socially. And I met guys that were construction workers. Guys that at one time in their life were very affluent. And they all had families attached. They started talking about children in their old hometown and locales all over the world, in the Midwest. And eastern seaboard, and I started to put people with these bodies in these faces and loved ones. Because when I got there, I thought I wasn't like these people. Yeah, I lived the same life. Yeah, I came off Fifth Street. But it was just some bad luck for me, I thought. And I got to talking to these guys more. And they had the same sorrow and the same anguish and the same plight. And they all ended up where I ended up. And then I thought about alcoholism. How it has no respect for persons. Doesn't care where you come from. Their stories attested to that. I knew it was true. They received mail from their loved ones. They cried just like I did. And it gave me some hope. For once, in the last stages of my drinking, after I quit, a little fire, a match head inside somewhere.
Most would admit the start of a recovery process from an alcoholic state, an alcoholic environment, as violent as Fifth Street in Los Angeles, just didn't happen overnight. Most attribute this to a higher power. Whatever their belief, they are convinced they didn't do it alone. Finally, we enter the spirituality phase that we refer to in a 12-step program that becomes a way of life for the recovering alcoholic addict. From the recovery home, off the streets of LA, we conclude with the recovery process.
What created a change for me was I knew that of myself, for myself, from myself, I couldn't make it to drugs and alcohol, and it was like, I guess my prayer was just, you know what, if you ain't there, I'm screwed. And I left it at that. Things started to happen beyond my comprehension of my life. And intellectually, I couldn't describe it. There was no plausible reason. It superseded the law of economics. It superseded the law of morals. It superseded the law of finances. At times of my worst, when I don't have answers in certain areas of my life, I get down on my knees and kind of talk to my God just like I talk to anybody else. And I tell him, I need help, and I'll do it your way. But if you make a mistake, don't come crying to me. And every time he works. You know, I have a loving God, and I don't understand how he loves me, but he does, and it works. And I just kind of know some days. I just kind of know. I don't know how, but I know that it'll be okay, and I don't have to drink. I don't have to use. I don't have to hurt myself or anyone else. And just knowing that, so I don't have to live in my own skin with guilt and remorse, makes me want to go on.
You've been listening to The Bottom Line. I'm Gary Thiemann. Thanks for joining me. This has been Rolo's story. Rolo went through a very painful past to get this story on the air, with the hope that it just might help someone. You see, The Bottom Line is produced for just one reason, the main objective being to reach the person in the denial stages of alcoholism and or drug abuse. What an important contribution. Rolo's story is not unlike many other stories across this great country of ours. If you know of someone that might have a problem with drugs or alcohol, or if you have a problem, very easy to find a 12-step self-help anonymous program that just might apply to you. All you have to do is look in the white pages of your telephone directory, and that'll tell your story. Until next week, share the message, won't you? This has been a GRT production.
One step closer now, with one more fight. In paradise, they tell me that the sun shines all night. And maybe I'm crazy believing that stuff. But if this is it, well, it's not enough. I'm too close to paradise and too close to hell. And sometimes the difference is